Yeah, this is a monstrosity. So I didn't actually plan to have any slides, but I thought I might actually need one because I'll be pointing to some geography. Prudentialist actually made this. All right, so the author Mark Twain once said that history never repeats itself, but it does often rhyme. 2 millennia ago, ancient Greek metropolises sent colonists throughout the Mediterranean. A brief second later, decadent Greek civilization was enveloped by a tidal wave of Roman hordes. The Romans conquered their civilizational forefathers and then expanded their culture and wealth to the wealth and culture of antiquity to unprecedented heights. Just as the Romans must have looked at the Greeks in wonderment and pity, the remnants of heritage American diaspora look to its English motherland, whose imperial wings it has clipped. Just as the Roman Principate was invaded by barbarian hordes and racked with civil strife during the crisis of the 3rd century, the global American empire faces new and evil threats. It is my pleasure to deliver a little insight from your benevolent Yankee overlords on the ins and outs of running a postmodern empire through the means of order and exit, the way of the wasp. In my last shielding speech, I laid out a crude veneration of Italian futurist Filippo Tommaso Marinetti's vitalism as a reaction against Bronze Age perverts' concept of the matriarchal longhouse. My thesis was that modernity is not bad because it is new. It is bad because meaningful social bonds between men no longer exist, which results in a lack of dynamism, as seen in post-industrial social environments. The solution being a return to the American pioneer tradition of rigid, hierarchical, pronomian construction. I find frontiers and build new cutting-edge stuff with your friends. Also, find friends and build meaning relationships offline. Also, clean your room, bucko, and don't listen to anti-nihilist garbage. It was a fitting first speech for the first of many American events. In that speech, I dropped hints of my political affiliation towards the Yankee American system, a long-lost model of political economy that I have a little bit of nostalgia for. But in this speech, instead of Bapp and Marinetti, I want to combine 2 other thinkers, David Hackett Fisher and Nick Land over here, to explain the successes and failures of the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant political history in hopes that you Brits might learn a thing or two from your Yank overlords. This speech is a historical lesson in political economy from the WASPs that have wrestled for control over the soul of America by the dual means of white flight in order to retain wealth and retrench older folk forms of soft power, while at the same time owning equity in the businesses and properties of urban and suburban zip codes that actually matter. The WASP is industrious. He values property, contracts, quaint boutiques, and mechanical excellence. I believe in the dictum that American whiteness looks a whole lot more like Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, and farmers markets than it does Sonnenrad tattoos. The American WASP hinterlands looks like quaint diners, cursed gas stations in the middle of nowhere, endless cornfields, and snake-handling basement church services, rather than any sort of imaginary, esoteric, pagan imperialism. This is most certainly a truism across the Anglosphere because, after all, Anglos did settle on the fringes of the Anglosphere. Moralistic middle-class like South FC poofs sound a lot like New England moralists because they stem from the same genetic and mimetic cultural line. Appalachian frontier WASPs act like stubborn, clannish, provincial, North FC stereotypes, because they are effectively the same people. In an attempt to understand the global American empire, you need to understand who the original Americans were, how they managed their domain, and what they did in the face of globalization, modernization, and international ascension, and then demographic replacement. David Hackett Fisher's book, Albion Seed, is a behemoth, featuring 900 pages of statistics, diary entries, maps, and depictions that tell the story of 4 different Anglo-Saxon groups that settled in America. I use Albion Seed because the book is very entertaining and reductionist compared to American Nations by Colin Woodard. And we don't have time to discuss 11 American demographics. This map up here is actually from the American Nations, but it also can easily be laid out onto Fisher's format. So the book describes 4 different folkways, genetic and cultural lineages that you can trace many of our governing institutions and attitudes from. So the first folkway, or cultural genetic cluster, are the Puritans. They are pirates, merchants, speculators, industrialists. They are the descendants of East Anglian Protestant reformers that initially settled in New England. You'll see this as Yankeedom. And then spread throughout the northern Midwest and California. If Californians sound like moralistic Harvard professors, that is because they are the same people. Or at least they were Harvard professors. These moral reformers were behind most of the moral panics, including the political crusades of the abolitionist movement, temperance movement, eugenics movement, and the religious crusades, spreading the stemming from the Great Awakening evangelical movements. You can see the first born-again evangelical tendencies among the Protestants when you hear the story of Sir Harry Vane, a 24-year-old governor of Massachusetts, who was so devout he believed only Christians who were born again 3 times could truly be saved. The denizens of these Spartanesque theocracies would eat a stubborn diet of unseasoned vegetable stew instead of hunting game birds or lobster, because they stubbornly believed in upholding dietary tradition. As Protestants, as puritanical Puritans, they made it a criminal offense to waste other people's time. I will hopefully not be arrested by the Puritans today. Unfortunately, this very insular group was mostly demographically replaced in the latter half of the 19th century, mostly by Catholic immigrants. Where there once were pilgrims, the industrial success of the urban centers gave way to immigration and the mud bumps and paranoid provincial old stock holdouts like the mutterings of H.P. Lovecraft. And then there are the modern, ever moralistic termites crawling through the ashes, like Senator Elizabeth Warren. There's a great historical irony in the fact that the great mercantile nation builders, whose archetype Brother Jonathan and later Uncle Sam would come to embody the WASP nation genetically, faded away as its memes and frugal financial networks would conquer the world. The next folkway described in Albion Seed are the Cavaliers or planters. These southern coastal settlers were the landed estate-owning aristocracy and their underclass of indentured servants, who mostly came from the triangular region of southern England between Kent, Devon, and Warwickshire. I'm probably butchering that. This old Virginia, so they settled in the Tidewater and then later throughout the Deep South. And you can see the purple arrow where they came from. Let's see. They created a cavalier manorial system of estates and plantations that initially supplied the motherland with tobacco and rice and later cotton. I believe we were selling copies of Robert Filmer's Patriarcha at this conference. It's an extremely enlightening book, and it's also very enlightening to look at how Filmer's family would implement throne and altar into the governing of Virginia when his family moved to America. The planters were ruthlessly oppressive in their casual cruelty of their servants and oppressive nature towards the few women unfortunate enough to have been kidnapped and sent to the Virginia colony. The planters might have only held 20-minute long Anglican church services, but their balls would last up to 9 hours long. Social codes of honor bound planters together, not moral codes. This demographic would merge with the borderer folkway, which I will discuss later, but if you want a more distilled look into the modern planter and what he sounds like, Richard Spencer's maternal side is actually one of the largest land-owning families in Louisiana, and he properly conducts himself like an old Virginia aristocrat. The third folkway, the Society of Friends, or Quakers. These pious, tolerant, pacifistic individualists came from the poorer areas of England's North Midlands and settled around the Mid-Atlantic and Midwestern regions. So that is this light blue, the Midlands, although they didn't quite settle this other half. Even though they used to be the third largest demographic religious church in 1750, by 1820 they were the 10th largest. They were demographically submerged under a tidal wave of German and Scots-Irish immigration, whom they would later come to resent. Their influence can still be found in the individualistic municipal structure of a few states. I believe it's only really Pennsylvania, Ohio, Illinois, and a few other states. It's referred to as the corruption belt. So famously, Quaker Benjamin Franklin notoriously remarked on the swarthiness of the Swedish immigrants that settled on the frontiers of the Pennsylvania colony. If you want to look more into the moralism and activism of the Quakers, Kevin MacDonald's book, Individualism and the Western Liberal Tradition, absolutely tears the Quakers apart. They were radically egalitarian in their application of the law, but they believed in a strict hierarchy of morality and spiritual aristocracy overlaying secular matters. Their activism lasted all the way up until the 1960s civil rights and anti-war movement, where many of these activists were trained by Quakers. The last folkway, the borderers, are lovable Baz North FC settlers of Appalachia in the western hinterlands. So they originally came from Northumbria. They are called Scots-Irish, but they are neither Scottish nor Irish. These settlers were Calvinist radicals from loosely governed and frequently raided areas of Northumbria on the English border with Scotland, who later settled the Ulster plantations and then moved to western Pennsylvania and then spread like wildfire through the Appalachian Mountains and the American West. You'll see this in Greater Appalachia and the far west. Theologically, the borderers were mostly Presbyterians, identified by their red Covenanter sashes they wore, hence the term redneck. Their Presbyterian heritage could also be seen in their notoriety as Protestant revivalists that held sermons at the top of hills and supported William of Orange, Bill, creating the origin of the term hillbilly. These borderers would become the main Jacksonian Democrat supporters and have had 19 other presidents represent them, including the Bushes and Donald Trump. These borderers are known for their historic reputation as coal miners, log cabin builders, and cowboys. They are also distinguished by their clan families, honor code, and tradition of vigilante justice. Although they were historically predominantly Presbyterian, their religious affiliation would mutate and adopt the lowest church evangelical adaptations contracted by innovations from the Puritans and Quaker theology. The border concept of liberty bound within Scottish Enlightenment natural law tradition is also significant. The get off my lawn ethos espoused by the Borderers and their aversion to intellectualism and any form of synthesizing dialectics are also staples of these proto-libertarian impulses. The Borderers were also unanimously resented by the other American settlers. A Pennsylvania writer once called Borderers the scum of two nations, while another Anglican clergyman called them the scum of the universe. God love the Borderers. Now that you Brits actually know who the Borderers, Planters, Quakers, and Puritans were, let's actually talk about American history. The American Revolution was a Puritan smuggler and border revolt against the crown. Puritan merchants wanted to trade goods in new markets other than the British motherland against the wishes of the mercantilist Britain. And the border pioneers wanted to expand westward over the Appalachian Mountains in clear violation of Indian territorial agreements between the natives and the crown. And much of this borderer desire for expansion and adventurism territorially can be seen a lot in the 20th and 21st century American military adventurism that extends to this day. In the American Revolution, the Quakers were nominally neutral and the Planters were generally more sympathetic to the crown. I believe an Anglican clergyman actually tried to poll the original aristocrats of the Virginia colony as to whether they supported the crown or the Puritans in the English Civil War. And it turned out, I believe it was 96% were Cavaliers, so they were very loyal to the crown. As a general rule of thumb, the Borderers and Puritans, New England and the Appalachians almost never get along, but the American Revolution was a unique phenomenon. Almost immediately after successfully gaining independence from Britain, the Puritans and Borderers developed factions as the loose Federalist and Republican coalitions in the first of 6 or so political systems. So these political systems, coalitions, usually last about 40 years, give or take a decade, before tensions between the two coalitions erupt. One coalition is able to assert dominance over the others, and then the two coalitions reform, almost as the laws of gravity dictate. We will always have two factions. You have to understand that American was constitutionally designed to have sectional factions as a feature, not a bug. In order to justify the creation of the federal government to oversee the nominally independent states, the Federalists anonymously wrote 84 essays explaining their intention and logic as to the sovereign American federal government. The Anti-Federalists wrote their own anonymous rebuttals as an act of, in order to provide omens of an ever-expanding behemoth of a tyrannical American government. On the issue of factions, Federalist 10 by James Madison explains the logic of American parties. He reasons that factionalism will always exist because of human nature. And so you can only really either address its causes or its effects. To combat human nature, the human nature of factions, to stem the causes, one can either eliminate liberty by eliminating heretical political positions or maintaining governments so small and homogeneous that no other opinions could exist. If a government was reduced to the size of a city-state, Madison reasons, a demagogue could hypothetically show up, like in the case of Athens, and the population could end up supporting an abortive Ionian rebellion and then backfire and have the city burned to the ground. The best solution that the Federalists came up with is Mad Max Thunderdome politics. So he reasons that a larger federated republican form of government secures the liberties of its minorities by pitting all of the factions throughout the entire country against each other in a battle royale, blunting the representative power of any one interest group. This functionally makes national American politics a bloated nightmare of a nightmarish, gridlocked slog of schizophrenic incompetence and competing interests surfing the zeitgeist, but it also makes the American government coup-proof from the outside. Unless there's a near universal consensus that something needs to change. Everybody in America can hate the federal government for some reason or another, but it will always lumber onward. You can shake your provincial stick at Washington, D.C., but there is no one monster to shake at because there are a million interest groups fighting for influence and supremacy at any one time. So the American political system is a gladiatorial fight, essentially of muted, bland swamp monsters talking past each other to support implicit economic and social interests of their electorate. American political theory has always been very pragmatic, stressing that the world is not a stable system, and therefore the correct course of action is to make the nation as dynamic as possible. Because the nation was so religiously and culturally diverse from the very get-go. How do you actually balance these factions? Either you could break these up into very small statelets, or you could try to build something bigger. So the first major power blocks that emerged after independence was the nation-building Puritan Federalists, aka the Nationalists, led by Alexander Hamilton, whose policy suite came directly from the teachings of German economist Friedrich List. I don't believe we're selling List's books in the back. No, we're not. Hamilton was born in Barbados, but he was ideologically as much of a reactionary Puritan merchant as one would ever see. The Federalists supported high tariffs to develop early American industry on the cusp of the Industrial Revolution. This next part is going to drive the Mises Institute folks off the walls. They supported central banking to tie the wealth of Yankee coastal elites to the health of their nation, often in very corrupt ways. But nonetheless, you have to find some way of connecting the money powers to the actual health and wealth of the nation. They supported large public works projects. They supported centralized tax collection to invest in infrastructure, like canals, highways, forts, and later railways that interconnected the vast American territories. And they supported the development of a large navy to protect American mercantile interests. The Federalist Puritans would reign over this Hamiltonian American system. The Federalists were primarily opposed by frontier borderers and Southern planters. This coalition originally consisted of anti-Federalists or Republicans led by planter Thomas Jefferson. The planters wanted lower tariffs to support agrarian exports, opposed centralized taxation and central banking because tariffs. I'm sorry, I'm getting lost. They opposed centralized taxation, mostly because the Federalists targeted many cash-strapped border frontiersmen who didn't have much money to feed the coastline anyways. The American Bank of the original Bank of the United States, the original central bank, would effectively drain money from the hinterlands and put it into the pockets of Yankee speculators. And in response, the borders often tried to kill the central bank. This impulse would be the impetus for the Greenback movement, Free Silver movement, and later on the Federal Reserve, if you look at the coalitions. And they preferred the development of an army to assist in westward expansion and to fight the natives. In the first half of the 19th century, it was mostly a conflict between two different strategies of land development. The borderers and planters wanted to develop new agricultural farmland outward to the frontier, clearing out Indians as they pushed west, while the Puritans and Quakers wanted to develop upward rather than outward. They preferred industrialization along the coast and development of an international trading network, overthrowing Latin American and Asian nations as they ripped open new markets abroad. The natural role of America is as the regional hegemon of the Western Hemisphere, per the Monroe Doctrine of 1823, which declared an end to all further European colonization and expansion into our hemisphere. Upward versus outward development dialectic was very concerned with the question of central banking and later the gold standard question for the entirety of the 19th century. Coastal federalists and business interests would lobby for the creation of a central bank and later support a conservative gold standard policy, while frontiersmen would routinely try to derail attempts to monopolize central banking on the coasts, often indirectly supporting foreign business banking interests and undermining or compromising American monetary sovereignty. As I said earlier, they would later support the silver standard and fiat currency in order to more easily interject specie on the godforsaken, cashless American hinterlands. The first 7 presidents were either Puritans or planters and predominantly Federalists. In order to tie the nation under one federal government and to actually generate revenue, Federalist Hamilton placed a tax on whiskey, leading to the border revolt in western Pennsylvania. Out on the frontier, cash was rare and commodities such as whiskey made up a significant portion of the Appalachian economy. As wild as the Wild West was, the planters and Puritans, most significantly the planters, Puritans, and most significantly borderers settled it. The Federalists developed a small navy and eliminated pirate kingdoms on the Barbary Coast. Republicans pushed out the natives as they developed homesteads. What they did was they grew nutrient-intensive cash crops until the soil was depleted, and then they picked up and then kept moving westward ad infinitum until they actually ran out of space. The War of 1812 was a minor speed bump. The Federalists wanted you Brits to stop harassing Puritan merchants. The Federalists also wanted to seize Canada because of some strategic ports, but it ended in a status quo. When the war came to a conclusion, this was the end of the first, a little while after the War of 1812, was the collapse of the first political system, and then the rise of Andrew Jackson and his populist Democrat coalition of borderers gaining political ascendancy. The Democrat Party under Jackson was initially a border party that supported the interests of Western frontiersmen and Southern agrarians, plus Catholic ghettos in the North, until the FDR realignment later. The Democrats have almost always been the pro-immigrant party and have always been the go-to party for Catholic political machines, stemming from Jackson's base of Scots-Irish, English, Irish, and German settlers, while the Whig Party that grew to oppose Jackson, forming out of the crater of the Federalist Party, was a coalition of Puritans, Quakers, and some planters who attempted to pry away electoral dominance away from the Jeffersonian behemoth. Although in each state, the Federalists or the Democrats and Whigs were fairly close. If you actually think about the demographics that supported the Democrats versus Whigs, you'll notice that this is very similar to the coalitions of the English Civil War. So consider the Whigs being Cromwellians, supported by merchants in the Midlands, and the Democrats were these swarthy Irish Covenanters and Northumbrians. So during the second political party system, Jackson strangled the first central bank of America, ethnically cleansed 5 Indian tribes to make way for more settlers, and implemented a new spoils system, whereas the Federalists emphasized the creation of a professional bureaucracy of mostly Puritans and planters. The Democrats, whenever they were elected, would replace many, if not all, of the government employees under their purview with loyal party members and ethnic constituents, and also give kickbacks to their patrons. Jackson would also consolidate and expand the role of the executive presidency, being hailed or chastised as King Jackson by the Whigs. Meanwhile, the Whigs, whenever they gained an upper hand politically, would place protective tariffs on goods like wool and iron, and they would subsidize the construction of interstate infrastructure, while simultaneously trying to the subsidization of infrastructure enriches disproportionately the Yankee bondholders who invest in the projects backed by the U.S. government. And they also appeal to Western frontiersmen who benefit disproportionately from being connected with the rest of the world. In this political system, America would annex Texas after supporting a successful border rebellion against Mexico, and then invade Mexico again in an attempt to seize the California port of San Francisco to benefit Puritan merchants in the Pacific Ocean, and also to secure more land for border cowboys. The Whigs also successfully broke Japan out of its isolation by threatening to burn Tokyo to the ground. Meanwhile, the slavery issue was brewing. Slavery had been in slow decline up until the invention of the cotton gin in 1794. The slave population exploded due to the lower cost of cotton production. So much more land being acquired by the U.S., and also the development of northern industry. Even though the North and South were politically divided into different coalitions, they still needed each other to successfully produce cheap cotton shirts. Out of the ashes of the impotent Whig Party arose the Republican Party, a hyper-Puritan and Quaker abolitionist, nativist, and pro-industry party. These Republican moral crusaders would sponsor abolitionist terror cells and develop paramilitary fraternities such as the Wide Awakes. In response to, in spite of nominally supporting nativist policies, the North became increasingly Irish and German, with roughly a quarter of the Civil War Unionist Army being fresh off the boat immigrants, and 18% of the rest of the army being descended from at least one of their parents being immigrants. During the 1840s, there was a wave of immigration from Ireland due to the potato famine. They mostly came to New England cities like Boston. The Irish would create remarkably corrupt political machines in urban ghettos using Andrew Jackson's spoil system. The Germans a lot of them were revolutionaries from the liberal revolts of 1848 and also religious radicals. They settled in the Midwest, in the Midwest. Being Germans, they implemented German agrarian techniques and were very good industrialists, very good engineers. The Civil War devastated the Southern economy, wiping out many planter fortunes and imposing punitive military occupation and economic sanctions. However, many old planter families still live to this day, very wealthy, as oil magnates, chemical manufacturers, land developers, and whatever evil the Monsanto family has been cooking up in their laboratories. After the Civil War, the freed Southern black population would ally themselves politically with the Puritans. The immigrants that moved to the north from countries like Germany and Ireland would ally with the southern borderers, while Scandinavians in the Midwest would vote with the Puritans. The planters would wane in power for roughly 40 years. See the movie Gone with the Wind. In spite of Southern regionalist Democrats sharing the same party as swarthy immigrant hordes, the borderers were nominally nativists, opposing Puritan carpetbagging politicians, union agitators, and redistributist demagogues through quasi-Masonic fraternities like the KKK. At the same time, the borderers were laborers, miners, lumberjacks, and cowboys, and they used their labor unions like the Knights of Labor to put Chinese illegal immigrants on cattle cars and ship them back to China. On the Democrat question, from the Civil War until the end of the 20th century, the border WASP Dixiecrats would be at odds with Democrat Catholics and urban immigrant political machines. The contrast was probably starkest in the 1964 presidential primaries, where civil rights activist Lyndon B. Johnson ran against segregationalist, now segregation forever, George Wallace. It was a very broad church party. Meanwhile, the Republicans fielded Richard Nixon, whose father was a Methodist Puritan and his mother was a Quaker. The Republican Party also suffered greatly from its own mercantile success. The Puritan Republican Party was unable to balance its nominally nativist base with the policy of supporting international trade and industry because they benefited from foreign labor. So this was the rise of the Democrat Catholic political machine. The Jacksonian border spoil system effectively turned cities into immigrant fifth columns. To counter immigrants packing municipalities with their cronies, the Puritan progressive movement was kicked off to create professional bureaucracies based on, like, quote unquote merit, defined by talent with fealty to the zeitgeist. So these Republican progressives also pushed for moral crusades like prohibition. They pushed for women's rights and women's suffrage in order to dilute the vote of overwhelmingly male immigrants. And they also sponsored extensive public works infrastructure projects. The progressive era was the era of Puritan nation building. Meanwhile, the Puritans were actually being demographically replaced in their own homeland of New England. The book Wasps by Michael Knox Barron is a very historically visceral description of the decadence and suicide of the Puritans. This period was marked by the transition of the Puritans of New England from pious pioneers constructed as a republic of virtue, or Christian Sparta, as Sam Adams said. But now, in the late 1800s, poet Robert Lowell called them Mayflower screwballs only fit for the asylum. The remnants of old stock Puritan aristocracy went into banking, where they amassed fortunes without investing any time into creating families to actually inherit the fortunes. Borderer Theodore Roosevelt said that, quote, "Our strongest and most capable men threw their whole energy into business, into money making, into the development, and above all, the exploitation and exhaustion at the most rapid rate possible of our natural resources," unquote. In the late 19th century, the Gilded Age saw mass industrialization, with WASPs, industrialists, and plutocrats at its head, while the Appalachian Mountains were stripped of almost all of their vegetation. So at this point, you can only look at someone like H.P. Lovecraft, this broken, fearful, neurotic mess, who watched his father go insane, his New England estate fall into ruins, his family slip into poverty, and his once prosperous Puritan race being swallowed up in a sea of immigration. So the response is a moral crusade. So what you had were progressive heroes, nationalists like Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. I know. Hold on. So the nation was demographically tearing itself apart and needed some sort of unifying concept and some sort of common mythos. The progressives were eugenicists who were concerned about the decline of their once vital race, with their birth rates collapsing below replacement levels, and dysgenics becoming the new Puritan hypochondriac moral crusade. Like out of this period, you actually got authors like Madison Grant, who wrote The Passing of the Great Race. The current birth rate collapse we're facing right now, it happened before, and it took 2 wars and a global depression to bring WASP birth rates back up. But that only worked for 25 years. What the third political system accomplished was the establishment of a thoroughly nationalist and activist political federal bureaucracy and the creation of a national mythos deifying the Founding Fathers. Meanwhile, the Founding Fathers' stock was slowly withering away. So these progressives, these nation builders, even though they were nativist WASPs, they also included a hefty number of communists, Wall Street bankers, and worst of all, vegetarians. The old border adventurers would continue to conquer territory like the Spanish territories of Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines on behalf of planter and Puritan business interests. Meanwhile, at home, the late 19th century was the golden age of strife between organized labor, usually borderers and immigrants, against Puritan industrialists and planter agrarians and factory owners. Fortunately, all 4 WASPs supported the 1924 immigration moratorium, capping immigration from swarthy Mediterranean and Eastern European countries. This political system came at a close when Herbert Hoover's Puritan progressive Republican run failed, and the old coalition fell together in the face of the Great Depression. FDR, Franklin Roosevelt's coalition was, there were borderers, Quakers, and planters, along with Judeo-Papist voting blocs against the Puritans, trying to stamp out the last remnants of Yankee nationalism. FDR was Dutch and Puritan, with his grandfather making a large family fortune smuggling opium into China, and then investing all of his profits into railways and the New York real estate market. But he implemented broadly border policies while consolidating a managerial progressive bureaucracy under the presidential bureaucracy, giving birth to a brain trust known as Moldbug's Cathedral. The World Wars and Depression ushered in the fourth political system in which a consensus was reached. We will have top-down federal activism. The Democrat hinterlands would have their economies bolstered by federal public works policies and infrastructure projects, while the pro-business Republicans would demolish Black and Catholic ghettos and create inner-city highways, while they're moving the remaining WASPs into the suburbs. So within the Republican Party, there was a sort of coup developing out of that eventually grew into the civil rights movement. A coalition of African American Puritan vassals in the rural South and urban North attempted to organize a political coup against the repressive eugenicist bureaucracies, which bulldozed their neighborhoods and funneled wealth into the suburbs and rural WASPs' hands. Within the Democrat Party, the coalition of borderers and planter Dixiecrat interests broke down, with Quaker and inner-city immigrant interests splitting due to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Hart-Celler Act of 65, which opened America's borders up to non-white immigration, and the advent of the Republican Southern strategy that attempted to unify segregationist borderers and planter WASPs with Yankee business interests. The current paradigm is Republican borderers following the old Hamiltonian hinterland strategy, opposing Democrat Puritans, their Southern Black vassals, and urban immigrant political machines. Currently, Quakers and planters have split loyalties. Ever since the 1970s, we've had planter Jimmy Carter. Every Republican president has been a borderer, and the Democrats have fielded borderer Bill Clinton and non-WASPs like Barack Obama and Joe Biden. Since the end of the Civil War Reconstruction, the Dixie question loomed. Should Yankee land integrate Johnny Reb? There was resistance by intellectual movements like the Southern Agrarians that almost enveloped the whole nation. But since the Civil Rights era, WASPs America has slowly transformed the Republican Party into the pan-WASP party, in order to fend off the hordes of the Democrat ethnic constituencies. So where does that actually leave us? I'm getting to it. Like our once very puritanical, universities have had their Puritans defanged and kicked off their own turf. It's sad. The prevailing religion of American academia right now is ecumenical, secularized, mainline Protestant faith. Yeah, this is the Yarvin's ultra-Calvinist thesis. So what do we actually espouse in America? Like, what is our political theology? Well, there are three different political theologies. Faction one the evangelicals. Evangelical born-again churches were originally Puritan churches, but the born-again meme quickly spread from New England through New York and into the border Presbyterian and Baptist faiths. These post-millennialist, literalist, theologically conservative border churches stress the need for being rebaptized as the only means of salvation, support sola fide, preached biblical inerrancy, and predominantly spend most of their time evangelizing and converting. You can go to evangelical border seminaries at Southern Baptist Theology Seminary and Liberty U. Faction 2 of the American theology, mainline Protestants. Mainline Protestant churches are Puritan, Planter, Quaker. They're theologically liberal, ecumenical. You can go to, if you're part of one, you could probably go to any of the others. They really don't treat the Bible literally or seriously. So most churches split between evangelical and mainline churches, with theological differences being greater between evangelicals and mainlines of the same faith than between two different evangelical churches, or vice versa. So due to the to strawman the mainline Protestants, they believe that the Bible should be interpreted metaphorically and we should emulate the charitable acts of Jesus rather than preaching his sermons. This is why mainline Protestants become not so subtle atheists and support political redistribution strategies and support compassionate pro-LGBT activism. This is also why mainlines support charitable organizations like soup kitchens, children's hospitals, mission trips, and acts of social justice. You can go to mainline WASP university seminaries at Duke Divinity School, Princeton Theological Seminary, University of Chicago Divinity School, and Yale Divinity School. There's very asymmetrical academic power levels between evangelicals and mainline Protestant seminaries. The third is historical black churches, but they're not WASPs, so I'm not going to talk about them. All right, so I thought this speech was about order and exit. So what have we actually learned? Just as planned, let's turn to Nick Land for a few lessons, specifically from his essays, The Dark Enlightenment and Cant Capital and the Prohibition of Incest. I mean, I found it very fitting that, that Land used to be a professor here and might have spoken in this very room. So the first lesson that Land gives from his essay is that stomping on the old parochial bones of the Puritans generates momentum for neo-Puritan ideology. The meme is dead, long live the meme. Quote, as the ratchet process of neo-Puritan social democracy is radically facilitated by the orchestrated pillaring of its embryonic religious forms, so is its trend to consistently neo-fascist political economy smoothed by the concerted repudiation of a neo-Nazi or paleo-fascist threat. It's extremely convenient when constructing ever more nakedly corporatist or third positionist structures of state-directed pseudo-capitalism to be able to divert attention to angry expressions of white racial paranoia, the old progressives, especially when these are ornamented in clumsy, modified Nazi insignia, unquote. I mean, this is a mild criticism. New progressives stomp on old progressives. The new regime stomps on the smoldering remains of the old regime to justify its own existence while using the most productive machines of the old state. The old WASP's Puritans are mummies to be stored in a museum and alongside the U.S. Constitution, but this does not mean that the U.S. Constitution is dead or the old WASPs should be forgotten. The Constitution is a living document to be reinterpreted and reinvented after each different political system, to be theologically reinterpreted. So here's another one, another lesson. Quote, "The Puritan exodus from the old world to new world was the foundation of Anglophone global modernity. White flight is to fraying and dissolution as with the pre-founding migration. What gives white flight relevance is its sub-political character, all exit and no voice. It is the subtle, non-argumentative, non-demanding other of social democracy and its dreams, the spontaneous impulse of the Dark Enlightenment." All right, so this is actually a very good one and actually really gets at the heart of the American pioneer spirit. So exit, the ability to move with your feet and your wallet from one political polity to another, as opposed to voice, providing input on how the machinery of power is actually operated. Within the American tradition and Anglo-diaspora tradition, more broadly, we settle arguments through we don't settle arguments through revolutions. We settle them through space. In countries like France, with a central government and bureaucracy only in Paris, it only takes a small march on Paris or some coup to take down the entire system. Hidden in plain sight, we have the Federalist Papers that explain that America's capital is a hollow shell. There's no heart to stab or steal. There are no rulers, only representatives. There are only coalitions and interest groups. America is big and hosts an infinite number of factions and interests, with coup-loving wannabe dictator, one coup-loving dictator cannot topple all of the thousands of other wannabe dictators in Washington. They all step in each other's. They all step on each other's shoes. Thunderdome. Good luck, dictators. The only way to radically change things is to become a king president, like Jackson, Lincoln, or FDR, which is given by popular mandate by a supermajority of voters or federal bureaucrats to innovate, clean house, and restore order out of a broken political system. This has happened 5 or 6 times before. On the topic of white flight specifically, WASPs with wealth have been fleeing out of the swarthy American cities for centuries now. When ethnic minorities, immigrants set up ghettos in the cities, they always tend to create ethnic gangs and political machines, whether it's the Irish in Boston, Somalis in Minneapolis, Mexicans in El Paso, a certain long-nosed tribe in New York City, the Italians. Those political machines will find ways of extracting wealth from WASP landowners and transferring wealth to their ethnic constituencies. The spigot is one of the reasons why culturally reactionary anti-imperialists will embrace certain strains of socialism to support their political machines. The American WASP's answer found a solution. They found a solution to the crime plus wealth drainage problem in cities, and that was the creation of the suburb, i.e. exit. It's tight feedback loops and revealed preferences revealed by white flight. These suburbs are safe from inner city Democrat looting via taxation, free from crime, and are far from the swarthy hordes, but close enough to do business with cities. Suburbs and rural estates also have the benefit of retaining landed wealth, whereas American cities have an ongoing problem of urban blight. Suburbs do not have to be de jure ethnostates, as housing prices will select out all of the low IQ poors and select the more clever swarthoids to ascend to the white picket fenced waspdom. We wasps fled the cities for the suburbs, and we took our wealth with us. And then we encouraged a post-World War II policy of just build. In the 1950s and 60s, Eisenhower's infrastructure mega project, the International Highway System, was a $1 trillion project to interconnect all of rural border America and planter America. It was a very large project. Wall Street Yankees invested and profited from government bonds used to fund roads and construction projects. The borders got a sudden influx of investment to develop land and resources unlocked by upgrading infrastructure. And the remaining WASPs could move out of crime-ridden cities and into newly constructed hinterland suburbs. Meanwhile, the municipal political machine swarthoids could raid only the treasury of, they couldn't raid the treasury of landed wasps who did not exist, nor could they stand for too much bad behavior from their underlings in their neighborhoods. As bad as Chicago is, Mayor Lightfoot still sicks her SWAT teams on gangs. And as bad as New York City got, the swarthoids Italians were still able to bring in Rudy Giuliani to create a Disneyland surveillance state. So the two solutions the WASPs came up with to deal with immigrant crime and theft was exit. So have heritage Americans accrue wealth in the safety of suburban ethnostates, while at the same time providing as many opportunities for heritage Americans to make more wealth on a free global market. And then the second one is order. So create a surveillance state in swarthy Democrat strongholds to keep nominal order in America's economic organs, like Wall Street, while arming the free suburban and rural areas to keep out the riffraff. So the Democrats, they have cops, we have guns and churches. Simple as. The basic strategy is to defang dysgenic, is also to defang dysgenic social welfare schemes through various schemes like urban planning that contain run immigrant communities in small districts so that housing prices of the wealthy can be kept intact. It's actually very Machiavellian what a lot of Democrats do. They do have certain quarters, and they do actually have they have urban planning strategies, specifically like buses for some reason. Like whenever they want to keep the riffraff out of their mansions, they always cut bus funding, so they can't. So certain communities can't drive over to their communities. As Nick Land says on the implicit battles of order and exit, quote, that American whites and blacks, crudely considered as statistical aggregates, coexist in a relation of reciprocal fear and perceived victimization is attested by the manifest patterns of urban development and navigation, school choice, gun ownership, policing, and incarceration, and just about every other form of revealed rather than opposed, as opposed to stated preference, that is to be related to voluntary social distribution and security. An objective balance of terror reigns, erased from visibility by commentary, yet incompatible perspectives of victimization and denial. Yet, between the two liberal and conservative positions on race, there is no balance whatsoever, and something more of a rout. When hordes of swarthy immigrants bring crime and political machines to a city near you, you're not allowed to complain because it triggers a certain dialectical circuit that goes something like this. So there's a controversial police incident involving a non-WASP. The WASP says, "I'm not racist, you're thugs." And the non-WASP says, "I'm not a thug, you're a racist." So the current theological and political zeitgeist of polite society dismisses accusations of bad behavior due to the origin of the person. So on theological grounds, the conservative "you're a thug" accusation is thrown out due to the theological tenet that all souls are equally good souls, but material inequities and political oppression have caused some demographics to do worse than others. At the turn of the century, the WASP attempted to adopt a political platform of order through the progressive movement and women's suffrage. The progressive movement politically defanged the political machines for a little while in urban slums and replaced, So after World War II, WASPs adopted the political platform of exit in the ideological strain of libertarianism and a pragmatic policy suite of white flight into suburbia, as discussed earlier. This puts borderers, blue-collar, pro-union, pro-labor types into the same party as Puritan union busters and plutocrats. However, the Republicans have fared well electorally in putting border candidates like the Bushes and Trump into the front of their party. It's really not a coincidence that Trump's favorite president is Andrew Jackson. So within the Republican Party, we're dealing with the borderers and Yankee Puritan, the remnants of the Yankee Puritans in the same party. So there's a little bit of contention between lower class and upper class Republicans. Land points to the, so I often hear, as a Yankee, it's very disappointing to see the collapse. But it's been happening for a long time. And the dying Yankees essentially ideologically exploded in the twilight of the late 18th century, like a supernova of democratic, poetic idealism. The WASPs were neurotic Nordicists that cared about the bond the Anglo-Saxon had with the land, but they were also conscientious Nordicists that supported industrialized capitalism and international trade, but lamented the rapaciousness of borderer resource extraction. A lot of words, word salad. I'm sorry, I'm wordy. But this is where the global American empire's sustainability meme comes from. We're neurotic. We want to be these cutting edge industrialists, but we also are Nordicists who care about the land, and we have to somehow consolidate the nation of immigrants. God, that's a lot. The Yankee wanted to defang fifth columnists' loyalties of the immigrants and their political machines, so they pushed for melting pot nationalism into the discourse. This was a devil's bargain. Essentially what it did was it killed the idea of being a WASP in order to defang the ethnic loyalties of the migrants in America. And it's, so our ideological explosion caused all this, and the only things that you can really do are embrace non-ideology, like hard revealed preference and apolitical construction, because I've had to cut a lot of the speech. I'm very wordy. There's nothing more reactionary than raising sons to be good men. I wish you Brits the best of luck. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak, and thank you for being such a good audience. God bless the UK.